Welcome back to the only channel in the Upside Down. Come in and stop by, and now it's just me and you and your friend Steve. Today we have yet another huge batch of updates to the Stranger Things lore and story that are done by none other than Jamie Campell Bower as Vecna/Henry and Matthew Modine as Brenner himself. They both have reprised their roles in this new 3-hour-long VR story game. And let me tell you, it is a wild ride. If you have a VR headset, it's definitely worth a play. I did not expect such an emotional, story-driven ending to this game. And if you don't have a VR headset, buckle up because we're about to talk about everything important that this game added or changed in the Stranger Things story from Season 1 to Season 4. So much happens in this game, it's wild that they're using this to fill in some of the gaps in the show. Leading up to it, I kinda just assumed that we were going to get a Vecna game where we get to throw, squish, and snap all the bones of the Demogorgons that you can find. And while that on its own sounds intriguing and like a really fun game, this was all of that and so much more. If you're new here, be sure to go down and hit the subscribe button so hard it portals into another world, and then for all the subscribers, there's cookies to munch on in the comments while you watch the video. Now that we all have snacks, let's jump right into it. So the game starts off with a tutorial with you as Henry strapped down to a chair in MK Ultra as Dr. Brenner instructs you on the controls. This is basically Brenner teaching Henry how to go into a void like we see Elle do in the show, and shows him how to bring what he's thinking about into it, telling him he's the god of his own creation. Brenner teaches Henry that he can not only reach out and grab what's inside of him, but he can reach out and grab what's outside of him. He can reach out and open a window to spy on whoever he likes, and he uses this power to peer into the town of Hawkins. We actually get to see a little cameo from a 20 years younger Benny at his diner, which is pretty cool, but Brenner instructs him to find someone speaking Russian in Hawkins. We see what looks to be 3 random kids exploring the abandoned Creel house, talking about the demon that Victor thought killed his wife and daughter, and as he's searching for the Russian, Brenner interrupts Henry because Elle is reaching out. They hear Elle call out to Will for the very first time in the show, and Henry gets a PTSD flashback of when she beat him and pushed him into the Upside Down. Vecna tells Elle to keep calling out to Will that he'll find her. Vecna's in the Creel house, and Brenner is telling him how restless his mind is since Elle rejected him and weakened him, and now it's making his control over the Upside Down slip. Now, kinda big spoiler in case you're going to play the game for yourself, just fair warning, this voice in Henry's head is called Shadow Brenner. Now, that's all the context we get for the first hour until he starts telling Henry that he wants to be let free to devour the world, and then it clicks. This Brenner voice is really just the Mind Flayer literally talking to Henry. Yeah, it just kinda lets you be confused for the first hour of gameplay until Chapter 5, where it starts at the end of the Hawkins massacre and shows Henry's literal first steps in the Upside Down, and it shows you why the Mind Flayer sounds like Brenner. After he gets into the Upside Down for the first time and wanders around, there's a voice that he hears. It's Alice, his little sister, calling out to him, and then he hears his mother, and then his father, and then Dr. Brenner. The Mind Flayer chooses to use Dr. Brenner to speak to Henry since the Mind Flayer says it wants to study Henry, and that's what Brenner did to him. We're going back to the beginning of the game. I just wanted to explain why Brenner is talking to Henry the whole game. It's actually the Mind Flayer. It's a cool twist to figure out in the story, but it is confusing. Now you know this, it should make a lot more sense that it's the literal Mind Flayer speaking and not Brenner. Going back to where we were, it's still kind of the tutorial, but the Mind Flayer tells Vecna that since 11 rejected him and he's emotional, his control has been slipping, and so you have to go around the Upside Down taking over the minds of Demogorgons and these plant things. The Mind Flayer tells you that they are all theirs to control or corrupt, literally ready to be turned into their minions. And then Vecna tells the Mind Flayer that he's disrupting his world and hiding his trophies, aka his mom and Alice strung up like we saw the others he killed in Season 4 by rearranging everything in his mind space, and the Mind Flayer tells him his obsession with the past is what keeps him weak, and that obsession is how he loves, but he only loves them after he's killed them and they couldn't send him away to Dr. Brenner anymore. We see a past memory of the Creel house. There's a dining room table all set up with food and then this little solo table in the other room. I wonder if young Henry used to rebel and go sit by himself in the other room because he hated his family so much. It then flashes to the night Henry killed his mother. She snaps and falls down comedically on the table. Later, as Vecna is rebuilding his world, the Mind Flayer tells him that the stray monsters will still roam his mind untamed. And he asks him, what if they find little Alice, as if Henry actually cares about her? But I think he just cares about her as his trophy. Eventually, he rebuilds the steps we see in his mind space and finds Alice hidden at the top of them and enters her mind. And then it shows us. It shows young Henry walking into her room at night while she's sleeping and lets a jar of black widows loose. And apparently Alice was so gullible that since then, nothing has been as satisfying to Henry as messing with his sister was. The Mind Flayer tells Vecna that they could be so much more if they left this mind space and stopped fixating on the past and let him be free to conquer more. And Henry tells him soon. This was at the point I realized Brenner's voice was the Mind Flayer, but there's still another 30 minutes of gameplay before the actual reveal. It started talking about Henry's obsession with time and how being able to feel time is the most human thing about him, and that it makes him inefficient, and that obsession is the only way he knows how to connect. And then Henry tells it that his obsession is what will eventually set it free, that he'll let it loose on Hawkins to repay 11 for what she's done to him. I mean, they kind of get into it throughout the game and go back and forth at each other, and Vecna has to tell the Mind Flayer that he's the one in control and not to forget it. And Vecna can actually feel when El comes into the void. The Mind Flayer just wants to be set free and devour everything, and Vecna tells it that they will through him. El is their gate. They then go to where El finds Will for the first time in the void, and Vecna realizes here that Will is the key that they've been waiting for. And then it cuts to season 2, 1984, when they possess Will at school. Vecna brings Will into the void, and Will starts trying to think of happy memories to bring himself back home. And Vecna tells him he can't hide from what's in his head. And Will sees the Mind Flayer, and then as a happy memory, Will goes back to Castle Byers with Mike. He eventually ends up at the day they were at the arcade with Max, and Vecna chimes in how Max is getting along so well with his friends, unlike him. He starts warping reality around him as all the games start calling him loser, and his friends run out of the arcade and trap him there, calling him weird and a loser, but Will knows it's not real, that his friends would never do anything like that. Vecna's trying to convince him he's a freak, just like he is. They do another warped reality vision at a comic book shop where Will sees spiders coming out of his friend's mouth, and then everything turns into the Upside Down. This would have been another cool scene to see back in season 2, but then it cuts to a sleepover in Mike's basement where a Demogorgon comes out of nowhere and starts eating Mike, who's sleeping on the ground. That would have been insane to see in the show. Vecna tells Will he'll be there soon while staring at the Mind Flayer, and then it trauma swaps in between all these different scary moments, but the Demogorgons actually get him. And he's going between all these memories using one of those viewfinder toys that you see different images with. Then it goes to him literally coughing up the slug at the end of the season, and Vecna is in the mirror and reaches out and rips the viewfinder from Will's hands. I mean, Will is face to face with Vecna here, which is insane. Then Vecna shows this memory vision to Will of Mike talking to him about how amazing El is. Vecna's just in his head taunting him to tell Mike how he really feels about him. And this is from season 1 of the show. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying the video. I've got a huge Stranger Things deep dive coming up that you're gonna want to see. Chapter 4 is The Spy and starts with Vecna saying that Will is going to be his spy to figure out where 11 is. Vecna shows up at a D&D match in Mike's basement to take over the boys' minds. He goes into Dustin's mind while he's watching TV, and a giant robot pops up and smashes Vecna out because they learn 11 has made the boys confident, and they're not as easy to possess as Vecna thought. He does Lucas and sees a fantasy of him on a date at a drive-in movie with Max, which is kinda sweet. A date they never got to go on, unfortunately, because of the... Vecna tries to influence him, but he kind of just brushes it off. UFOs pop out and abduct Vecna, which is kind of funny. He goes into Mike's head trying to scare him of never finding El, but since they're playing D&D, he's distracted and is completely unaffected. But Will, on the other hand, is barely surviving from Vecna. He goes on and on, beating him down until Will gets a nosebleed. Yeah, Will gets the nosebleed. How interesting is that? Vecna struggles to possess all of the boys except for Will, and the Mind Flayer tells Vecna that he lost to the children again. The only reason Will is easy to possess is because Vecna knows his fears. And then the Mind Flayer shows Vecna the moment El banned him into the Upside Down, and Vecna sounds scared, saying, "Don't make me relive this again," as if it's his worst nightmare. And then Chapter 5 is Transcending the Human Form. This is what we jumped forward to earlier. This takes place in 1979 after the massacre, as soon as Henry was pushed into the Upside Down, which is so cool. You gotta remember, at this point he's still mostly human, mostly Henry Creel, and is confused and has no idea what happened or where he is. You literally get to play his first steps in the Upside Down, which is awesome. He's almost relieved when he sees the first demo bat fly by, just knowing he's not alone in this weird place. And when he sees the first demo dog, he says, "Food? Has he been eating demo dogs to stay alive? What? Henry walks further into the Upside Down, and this is where he hears his sister call out to him, then his mother and his father, and then eventually the Mind Flayer physically takes the form and voice of Dr. Brenner. The Mind Flayer chose the Brenner voice because he's doing the same thing to him, studying Henry and trying to make him stronger. The Mind Flayer tells him that he's absorbed everything in this world except for him because he's new material. It's crazy that Henry gets transported to a completely new world and finally escapes being the lab rat, only to be trapped and now have the exact same thing happen to him. I kind of feel bad for Henry. The Mind Flayer tells him he wants to know him further, and Henry tells it won't keep him here. He's not a thing to be studied. And the Mind Flayer snaps back with, "Your memories say otherwise," which is kind of funny, a little too soon honestly. Then the Mind Flayer goes to review his past, and we go back to Brenner testing 12-year-old Henry and MK Ultra. It tells Henry that he knows Henry's favorite memories are the ones where he's snapping bones, which is crazy, but accurate. Then it cuts to 12-year-old Henry getting tattooed by Brenner and the conversation they had. Brenner asks him how his chip is healing, most likely Sotera, the chip that's restraining him in Season 4 that 11 removed so he could use his powers to snap everyone with. Brenner calls the chip's restraint a gift and says he needs to establish some emotional strength in Henry and find a collaborative way that they can work together before he gets his powers back. And then you play as Henry working as an orderly at MK Ultra. Apparently his coworkers didn't like him because he doesn't do a good job at sweeping the floors because it's routine, and we know how much Henry hates routine. But he's leaving crumbs everywhere and they're going to get ants. So at one point he realizes he's in the Mind Flayer's mind and possesses the Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer was trying to invade Henry's mind and memories, and Henry escapes and is now in the Mind Flayer's mind trying to escape. It gets to the point where Henry is running from it in its mind, and it's trying to keep Henry as its test subject because it wants to study his memories. The Mind Flayer takes him back to another memory of Brenner and Tim at MK Ultra. Henry kind of lashes out at Brenner here and tells him that he's just a parasite leeching onto these kids that are special as he tries to control them. It's a pretty cool outburst that we never got to see anything close to in the show. Quite the different perspective too. I'm curious how this conversation would have played out in the show. Henry goes back to taming these monsters' minds in the Upside Down, and the Mind Flayer asks him to stop going towards the light and ignore the rifts, and also not to engage the wildlife. It says that contact creates links between you and the monsters until there's a large constellation of minds. The more minds, the more power. So Henry just goes around conquering more of these minds. But the Mind Flayer discourages it. I almost wonder in efforts to get him to do it more, kind of like Palpatine luring Anakin to the dark side, just lulling him along to see what he's truly capable of. It says that too many minds linked to the hive mind could cause bloating and cause it to burst. I mean, that kind of sounds like an important detail the kids could use in Season 5 to defeat the Mind Flayer and weaken Vecna to the point where they could defeat him. Back to the Upside Down, the Mind Flayer is still chasing Henry, but it says that it was lying about feeling bloated earlier, and then tells Henry together they will evolve into a new being. I mean, it kind of sounds like Season 5 final boss material. The Mind Flayer points out that they're each trying to devour the other and tries to get Henry to stop fighting. It looks like the Upside Down, or this mind space, used to be green, and as Henry takes it over, it turns the red that we see it in Season 4. Henry says that the Mind Flayer tried to absorb Henry, but he will absorb it and take its power, and then it snaps back with, he could never defeat us completely. They are multitudes, and mastery requires control, and it is Henry that is controlled by fear. The Mind Flayer found the memory that Henry will not even show himself, the one of young 11 banishing him to the Upside Down. But once the memory starts playing, Henry pauses it and says he learned how to control the Mind Flayer's projections and that he became the explorer of this world and let the Mind Flayer in only to learn how to devour it, to become it, and that now he will crush him. But apparently, ever since first contact with the Mind Flayer, Henry became one of them, a symbiote. And the Mind Flayer was drawn to Henry for his desire of revenge. Henry's hunger merged in the Mind Flayer. It too wants to devour everything in this world and the next. He definitely gives him the Palpatine Anakin speech of "give in to me and your power will be unlimited." Basically, the Mind Flayer needs Henry to infest new worlds, and Henry needs the Mind Flayer to hunt down 11. It basically wants everything to be a part of its hive mind until they are omnipresent and ubiquitous. It claims it's a parasite meant to find new hosts and new worlds to feast on, and Henry will be their vessel to do so. Henry says that he'll become one with the Mind Flayer, then use its powers to spread and find cracks between the worlds to escape and then destroy 11. And then next is the possession of Billy Hargrove. It starts out you playing as Billy driving around during Season 3, and then demo bats attack Billy in his car until he crashes, and then it cuts to him waking up at the steel mill, and then flashes back to him driving where he sees the Mind Flayer and hears Vecna telling him to gather the weak people of Hawkins and feed him their flesh. Billy starts having visions and nightmares of his abusive father telling Billy he's never been of use to anyone and that he should have made his mother stay, which honestly, I like hearing about Billy's trauma. I know he's mainly a villain, but I care about the crap he lived through that shaped him into who he is today. It cuts to Heather in the bathtub and she gets up and runs away until this huge Sarlacc-looking monster that you'd see in Berserk eats her. I think this is just the meat puppet in its early stages before it gets enough flesh to turn into the final boss, but I also think Heather was around until the very end. I don't know why it's showing her dying so early. Maybe it's a vision of what will happen in the future, kind of like the future vision Vecna showed Nancy of the hole being ripped in the middle of Hawkins before that happened. Vecna tells him that he's so hard to love that everybody close to him leaves him and then shows a random unconscious body. And I'm assuming this is Billy's first Hawkins townsperson he got for the meat puppet. And then you feed it to the demon and it grows. I don't know why, but this monster in particular has a definitive Berserk vibe to it. The nightmare takes kind of a turn, really emphasizing love, as if Billy just wants someone to love him. I know that the majority of the game takes place around the villains or bad guys of the show, but they're all victims in some way here, and you kind of feel bad for them. I'm not sure why Billy's nightmare is not being loved though. Maybe it just has stemmed so far from the trauma of his mother leaving him, but it says that this speech over the radio asking to be loved is from Billy's fantasy girl, as if it's him wanting a girlfriend and that's his biggest fear. He just wants someone to love him. It cuts to this scene of you feeding more people to the monster. It tells him that he hurts them because he's scared of them. They're just like him, broken and starving for love. I mean, in the show, I never really saw Billy as a romantic or as someone needing to find love. He kind of just came across more as a player, someone who just wanted to sleep with girls and had a big ego. But it goes on to tell him he wishes he could tie the girls to him and put them in the trunk of his car so they can't leave him. It says he wants to hide them somewhere only he has access to them so they can be alone together forever. And then it just cuts away from that weird nightmare. I feel like this is the farthest from the show's characters so far. I didn't get the vibe of him needing a girlfriend or loving partner in the show. It's all nightmare fuel from Vecna, but still, I would have thought his fear was more so of not being big enough or strong enough to save the people that he loved, to save his mother and himself from his abusive father. You get to play as Billy for a while, driving, and then you go back to the steel mill to feed the meat puppet all the people you got, and then you grab your keys and go back out driving around Hawkins some more, and then you go feed the monster all the people you found, and you just keep doing that until the monster grows big enough to sprout legs and eat people on its own. It's crazy this is a level of the game. And then you drive until you hear someone calling your name, and then you almost run over 11. It cuts to the scene from the movie where Elle is in the cabin and goes into the void and finds Billy sitting on his bed, but in this instance, Billy almost runs her over with his car. And I don't think I realized that when Billy told 11 that all this time they were building it for you. I don't think I realized he was talking about himself, literally building the meat puppet by throwing people into it. I thought that was really funny. He was being very literal. The Mind Flayer kinda eats Billy in his car or just picks him up in his mouth, and then we start chapter 7, The Trap is Sprung, where it cuts to a meat puppet POV of you in the meat puppet's mouth as it approaches Hopper's cabin. Is Billy in his mouth watching everything go down? Is Vecna in his mouth? Does the meat puppet just have eyes in its mouth and that's how it sees? Who knows, but this one's up for interpretation because I didn't see anyone in this thing's mouth. It's most likely back to Vecna's POV and he's just the one controlling the puppet, so you go over to start smashing holes in Hop's cabin trying to kill the kids, and it eventually cuts to Elle's POV as Mike rips the parasite off her leg, and then Vecna tells 11 she lost and failed her friends, and then 11 sees Max dead on the ground in front of Billy with the giant grandfather clock in the background. This almost looks like the graveyard location from Dear Billy in season 4, but still, it was traumatizing. Then she sees Mike getting impaled and dying in what looks to be the Creel attic. And then it shows her the meat puppet in front of an even bigger grandfather clock about to eat Lucas, Dustin, and Will. All of this happening after it leeches onto her leg is crazy. And then Elle gives it the old face rip, and it goes black, and this leads us into chapter 8. 11. This is 1986, so we're back in season 4. More specifically, Ella's in the Project Nina tank, which is really cool to see in first person. Now we get to hear the actual Dr. Brenner trying to help bring back Elle's powers. You go through MK Ultra now as 11, bumping into Henry as an orderly, and replay some of the scenes from season 4 as Brenner tries to walk you through some of your memories. And unfortunately, I don't have a VR headset to experience this the way it was meant to be, and I just watched the playthrough on YouTube, but honestly, it looks like such a fun VR game game. If you have one and you're a Stranger Things fan, I think it would be really cool to play. This chapter is so creepy, I wish I could experience it in VR. I love that you can just walk around the lab exploring and looking in random rooms. When you're walking these halls and the lights go out, it feels like you're gonna turn a corner and Slenderman will be there waiting for you. But nothing too new here. You play as Elle through this sequence all the way until you confront Henry, and then it ends and goes straight into chapter 9, which is the resurrection of Mad Max, which is very ominous, and this is where it takes an emotional turn. It starts in March of 1986, literally with Max saying she can't see, so you know it's about to be a crazy chapter. You play 11 in the void walking up to Max and Lucas. Vecna blames 11 for her death, saying that she put Max in his path and that's why she's going to die. And then we go to the skate park memory with Max. You catch up to her after she falls, and Vecna turns into Billy and tells Elle it's too late. Max is the fourth gate and she is what breaks the world. They disappear, and then Elle sees Billy beating up Steve, and then it cuts to her walking in the house when Max saves Steve and tells Billy to stay away from her with a very persuasive baseball bat to the crotch. And this is all in Max's mind. You're fighting demo dogs in Max's memories. Vecna has taken over her mind, and Max is running away through her memories as 11 chases after her, trying to fight off the monsters that are invading. As you wander the halls of Hawkins High, Vecna gets on the intercom and calls all 4 of the kids he killed in season 4 to the principal's office, which is really creepy. And then Elle watches him kill them in the halls as Demogorgons attack her. She makes her way to the gymnasium where the snowball dance is happening in Max's mind, where she's dancing with Lucas. And then the most jarring thing is said. Vecna says that Jane Ives has been expelled and will now be escorted off the premises. I know it's her legal name, but still, to hear Vecna call 11 Jane Ives, it just creeped me out. It's so personal. He had to have seen that from her files at MKUltra. 11 walks up to a drive-in movie where Max and Lucas are together in the back of a pickup truck, and just as you get there, Vecna swallows them in vines and then taunts 11 for doing what he does, as she tramples through Max's dreams and nightmares. But I mean, Max told her to follow her. She led Elle here. You end up killing all the Demogorgons and Max drives away in the pickup truck, which is very Max. Then Vecna tells Elle she's poison, and Elle responds that she helps people, she doesn't want to hurt them, and then Vecna claps back by saying he's watched her snap necks. I mean, we literally made a kill count video for all the necks 11 has snapped, so he's not wrong. Which, by the way, go watch that after this video, it's a really fun watch. Vecna tells her that anyone that gets in her way, she just kills, and he tells her that she's following a dead girl to her grave, that Max is lost, trying to get Elle to give up the chase. 11 follows Max into a void where she gets to talk with her, and she tells Elle she's not a monster. And then 11 tells her that the first time she saw her when she was in the gym with Mike, she was jealous, and she was the one that made her fall off the skateboard. She hurt her. But instead of getting mad, Max just tells her that she's not a monster because she got jealous. It just means that she feels things, and that makes her human. And then she tells her she doesn't have to be a superhero all the time. She likes her as Jane, which is so sweet. I was not expecting this to get so emotional. It cuts to Elle and Max in Scoops Ahoy talking about the day they spent together in the mall, and then Elle turns around and sees Max crying over Billy's dead body in front of the dead meat puppet. Vecna goes on to tell 11 she's a monster and that her friends will grow to fear her. And then Max chips in saying this isn't real because they would never fear Elle. Then the meat puppet pops back up and taunts 11, saying that she can't stop death as Max rises up and becomes another of Vecna's trophies. And you kind of protect Max in a hopeless final stand as hordes of Demogorgons get closer and closer to her, and it gets very stressful. It ends with you talking to her one last time before she tells you it's okay, whatever happens to her now, just promise to remember her. And then she pushes 11 out of her mind, and it goes back to Lucas holding her, and then Max gasps, as if all of this happened at the Creel house as soon as Vecna was defeated. But also, I don't know how Vecna was doing all that because Steve, Nancy, and Robin just set him on fire and shot him out of the attic. I don't know how that was just breezed over, but still, that ending was wild and added so much to the story. Getting to hear an extra 3 hours of Matthew Modine as Brenner and Jamie Bower as Vecna and Henry was really freaking cool. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed the video and send it to your Stranger Things friends. I'll be back with another one soon, but until then, I will see you in the comments. Peace.